Hi, welcome to Beyond Politics. I'm Catherine Clark. Pamela Wallin is well known to Canadians for her many years as a journalist and national broadcaster, and for the time that she served at the request of the Prime Minister as Consul General to New York after the attacks of September 11th. Pamela Wallin now sits in the Senate of Canada, and she joins me in Ottawa to talk about a very interesting and busy life beyond politics. Pamela Wallin, welcome to Beyond Politics. What a delight.
It's a pleasure.
Well, you know,
I do have to tell the audience I've known you since.
Yes.
You were born.
I know. I'm a lot less trouble now. I like to tell people that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll check with Mom and Dad.
Sure. They might have a different answer. Most parents do. You know, before the show we were chatting about the last time that we had sat down together. We see each other occasionally at events, but was when you were hosting your own show and you were doing a version of the Proust questionnaire with a group of women. And I was living in Toronto at the time, and it seems like so long ago, but it probably really wasn't all that.
No, it wasn't that long ago, and what I found about that group is they were pretty honest in their answers too, and it's a fun way to, you know, kind of poke yourself and get inside your head a little bit if you can just be prepared to loosen up. I love doing that television show, to go from working at networks in pretty rigid news and current affairs circumstances to go and do this show in which actually anybody who was interesting and had something interesting to say, that was our mission statement. So it took in politicians, it took in book authors and movie stars and ordinary citizens who did incredible things, and it was just wonderful. We even interviewed elephants.
Did you?
Yeah.
You interviewed how did that go?
They're excellent artists.
Okay.
And they're
very talkative.
Not very talkative, but highly emotional. They're very sensitive creatures, and so we just had a great time.
You know, we're totally skipping forward in our sequence of our chain of events here, but it must have been truly rewarding to be able to do exactly what you wanted to do professionally, because that would have been really what you were doing at that time period.
Yes, I'd come off the experience at the CBC, which wasn't great.
Yeah.
And left that under, you know, it was difficult circumstances. I'd known those people for many years, and so it was reinventing in a way. I remember having a conversation with a businessman friend of mine, and he said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "I want to do television. I love doing television, but I don't want to do it that way. Right. That's not the approach that don't decide what the story is and then go out and find people that'll help tell that story. Go and discover the story." And he said, "Well, start your own company." And I said, "Well, that's not how it's done in TV," because that was the sort of the leading edge of independent production on certainly in the current affairs side. And he said to me, and I said, "Furthermore, I don't know how to run a company." Right. And he said, "Can you balance your checkbook?" And I said, "I can. I don't often, but I am capable of it." And he said, "Well, that's all it takes to run a company. More money's got to come in than goes out, and that's the rule. If you can do that, you can run your company." And it was just one of those, you know, moments where the penny drops and you go, "Okay, let's try that."
Yeah.
And we did, and it was hugely successful, because the discipline of being in charge of the money as well as in charge of the programming, I think, helped focus my mind. Let's do stuff that really counts, that's really going to inform and entertain an audience. And so I thought it was a really good approach to programming.
Was it not also exhausting?
Yeah, we worked 7 days a week, and my trouble is, and I'm sure you're the same, is if you want to talk to somebody who wrote a book, you want to read the book, and not just that one, but the one they wrote before and the 6 articles they've written. So I had this process of kind of, because we did 5 days a week, of working in advance about 2 weeks, getting to know that person in a way that probably their wife or husband didn't even know them. And then being able to put everything down and sit and have a conversation, because you have to do that, because you have to know what's changed in their thinking. You don't want people just to regurgitate what they've done on every talk show, because people have seen that. You want to go in and say, what were the points in your life where you changed your mind, where you had an epiphany, where you went off in some direction you hadn't planned. That's where people really experience their own value system, what's at their core, and that's what's interesting for people to hear about.
It was a very different show, though, than what you had been doing. Did you feel the loss of not being able to do, or not being able to do, but you were doing the current events.
Yeah.
You were right in the thick of exactly what was going on that second.
Yeah.
And that's what you were doing. And then all of a sudden you've switched to being able to have this freedom to talk about pretty much whatever you wanted to talk about.
Well, it was just, to me, an ability to look at a story in a different way.
So
Carl,
you didn't miss
I didn't miss it. I didn't miss it because what we were doing was also interesting in a different way. You know, I was just talking about this the other day, but Henry Kissinger came on. Now, you know, this is a man who'd spent his life doing this, and he said this, and I think he'd written it in the book, but he said it in this conversation. It was, people used to ask me what to think about a certain event. And he said, now they ask me what to say. And it was just one of those moments, which is, he had captured the media culture in a nanosecond of what our political discourse was now much more like than it used to be. That we used to talk about, you know, what we thought and what got us to that point, and now people were interested in the glib, the comment, the soundbite, the one-liner. And he just kind of captured a generational change in politics and media and the impact media had on politics, vice versa. So I didn't feel like I was missing important discussion or insight. It just came from a different direction.
Did you talked a little bit about the CBC and about...
And being fired from the CBC.
Fired from the CBC. Which
you know, I now think was the best thing. I actually thought it very quickly thereafter was the best thing that ever happened to me. I'm one of those people that, you know, you make your bed, you lie in it. So I was staying in a situation where I was just profoundly unhappy and disagreed with a lot of the approaches to journalism. So to be released was actually, it set me off on this whole course. So I've got to be grateful that for the wrong reasons I ended up in exactly the right place.
Except it happened in a public way.
Yeah, oh yeah.
And you're a very public face.
Yeah.
And Canadians were used to seeing you every night. And that has its own element, no matter how gracefully something like that can be handled, and that wasn't handled very gracefully.
No.
It still hurts. It still
yeah,
smarts.
and it's the hardest phone call was, I mean, you're on the news one night and the next night you're not.
Right.
So there's got to be an explanation. And the call to my mother and father was the most difficult
Why?
one.
Because one would just think that they'd be the most supportive.
Of course they were, but I didn't, you know, still even at that time, you're rattled. You know, you're thinking, I've not failed at something before. This is... And I felt it as a failure. It's like people who get divorced. They somehow feel like it's a personal failure. It's just something that didn't work, and they probably shouldn't be in it.
Right.
But you don't see that at the time. So I phoned my mother, and of course, and Dad was on the phone downstairs. Right?
Yes.
He got dispatched
Those
to
are
the
always
second
the tough
phone.
ones, when they're both on the phone.
Oh, yeah, both on the phone. And my mom was saying all of the right things. You know, they're terrible, horrible people. They shouldn't have done this. You know, they'll be sorry. You know, all of those things. And Dad waited for a pause in the conversation, and he said, sweetheart, are you angry or are you hurt? And I thought for a minute, because I was sort of both, and I said, I'm pretty angry. And he said, good, now you just keep that ice cold, not red hot. And I thought, what the hell does that mean? Right? And thought about it for a second, but of course it was clear. It was like, red hot is the anger. It's about getting even. It's about looking back. And ice cold was just about, okay, what's done is done. Move forward. Get on. Don't let them define who you are. You've got lots more to do. And it was just so smart. And that phrase just came back to me 1,000 times. And I don't know, I was fired sometime in maybe April, you know, spring. And we were back on the air with a television program in September, ironically, on CBC News World.
Wow. Wow.
So some things do come around.
Sure. But do you think that the show, your show, could have been as much of a success if you hadn't gone through both the experience at CBC and the time at CTV, do you think that you could have, that it would have been the type of show it was if you hadn't had that experience of going through it and then having to make a decision of what do I want to do?
Really want to do?
Yeah.
No, obviously the training, the journalistic training just serves you in life for whatever you do, whether it's Consul General in New York, whether it's a senator on Parliament Hill. It's a very disciplined way to consume information and understand complicated events and try and reduce them to their simplest form. That's what you spend your life doing in the news business. So that was very good training to go into anything, including more television. But that personal experience of having to go through that in a very public way, I think made me much more empathetic to people who had moments in their life that had caused them to go one way or another. And I started I actually ended up doing a book about it called Speaking of Success, which was not a title I would have chosen because it wasn't 10 Easy Steps. It was people who had had the most unlikely beginnings in life and how it had shaped them and become. Tony Bennett, I remember doing this interview. He was the son of a single mother who took in laundry and sewing. And she talked to him about how he always had to take pride in whatever he did, because even though this was not what she had chosen to do, she had to do this to give him and her chances, and she wasn't going to be diminished by it. And so here is Tony Bennett. He'd come back. He'd sort of been rediscovered again on Much Music. His manager, I think his son maybe, had said, you know, start connecting with this next generation. So there he was in his late 70s, early 80s, you know, born again in the music world. And he kept reaching back to that moment, which is, okay, maybe this ride is over, and then finding another way to do it. Everybody had some story about turning points in their life, sitting at a dining room table, having a moment of understanding that they'd lost touch with their family and needed to get it back. There were 1,000 stories. And so we started to kind of search that out in terms of people to talk to about these moments, these defining moments, and what we can all learn from them.
Right.
So I don't know that I would have gone that route if I hadn't had one of those defining moments myself, and if it wasn't really fresh in my mind. So I think it did shape direction for sure.
Speaking of unlikely beginnings, you did not, grow up in downtown Toronto where you were regularly exposed to
the media elite.
Right.
No.
You grew up in a very small town.
Very small town in Saskatchewan, Wadena, Saskatchewan, still very much my home. Fortunate to have both my mother and father alive and there. And my sister and her daughters live there, so it truly is still home for me in a wonderful way. I grew up wanting to be a teacher because that's what my mom was, and girls were teachers and nurses and social workers. Did you ever
have any other sense of what you? No.
No, I mean that's what I was going, and I was going to be a French teacher, which seemed even more unlikely in a small town in Saskatchewan. But again. Finding a book in a basement with a great story attached to it, and it kind of sets you off. A woman babysitter who was a war bride who had kid leather gloves that her now late husband had bought her in Paris, France, and seeing a picture of the Eiffel Tower and vowing that I would go there, and it was in fact the first trip I ever made in my life.
Is that right?
Absolutely.
All based on that little book?
All based on,
Did you get a pair of kid leather gloves?
Of course I did.
Did you?
Of course I did. It was a must. It was just one of those things. But I had these amazing women in my life because my mother, who was a role model before we invented the word, these women who were my babysitters, Grandma Smale, who lived next door, who was not a grandma but was a grandma, a farm woman who had worked alongside her husband and broken land and done all of those things, Mrs. Fair, the war bride, who had all these exotic stories, women who just seemed really interesting to me. Then I went off to live with my grandmother. She was aging and alone, and lived with her in Moose Jaw for my high school years, and another incredible woman, just all the things, where I was discovering all these things about the world, and she would look at me and say, yes, well, you didn't invent that, dear. Right? and just great stories. And so went off to university, still intent on being a French teacher, very heady days of politics, women's movement, all of those things. Switched into psychology and social work. Left university and became a social worker in a maximum security penitentiary.
Right. I mean, that's so...
Who would have thought it, right? Who knew? And then the accidental phone call.
Right.
I mean, I just feel like everything has been not so much accidental as serendipitous, but because I'm a big believer in that. But a fellow I'd gone to university with, and he phoned me one day and said, I've tried everybody that I know. You're my last phone call. I'm desperate.
That's
that was
always
his
a
opening.
nice way to start. Thanks for the vote of confidence.
Yeah, thanks for coming to me first. And the host of his radio open line show had fallen ill, and he said, you did a lot of public speaking in university. He said, could you get a couple of days off and come down and fill in on this radio show until I figure something out? My boss was very amenable, and I went down, walked into the CBC radio studios and went, oh my God, this is what I'm supposed to do.
What was it?
Just
the feeling?
Women weren't journalists then, right? There were no other. Well, there was one woman producer in the building who became a friend and mentor to me.
Just one.
Just one. There were women. They were secretaries and assistants. Very powerful women in their own way, but not in. I wasn't allowed to have a key to the building. So the guys in the morning had to let me in because they didn't give women keys to the building. That's in my lifetime. I don't feel that old, but I did know that this was, everything I've done has always been a bit of a mission. You're going to save people, either, one person at a time in the penitentiary, or you're going to do it, in larger groups in the media. And it just was, I knew it was a calling. And so that was it. And it just began this 30-year career, radio, newspapers, television, across the country, around the world. I just was so fortunate. I worked hard, but I was in that business at a time when they were starting to recognize the fact that half the audience was women and they wanted to see themselves.
How did you go from this initial radio stint into television?
Well, that was a circuitous route because I came east and continued in radio, talked myself into a job at the Toronto Star Ottawa Bureau. Not easy to do because I didn't have any print experience, but I drove them insane. I think it was just like, let her go and maybe she'll shut up and stop phoning us, right? My friend Lou Clancy, he would be laughing if he were here with us to back up that story. And then I was appearing on a show called Question Period, still on CTV, with Bruce Phillips. And they always had 3 print journalists on to question the newsmaker of the week. And Bruce said to me after the first show I was on, he said, were you not afraid of the cameras or nervous about the cameras? And I thought, oh, God, I've done something really wrong. And I said, no, I'm sorry. I said, I forgot all about them. Like, I just forgot they were there. Did I do something really wrong? And Bruce looked at me and he said, if you are able to forget about the cameras, then you belong in television. And it wasn't long afterwards that I got an offer from CTV, and it was a great time.
It's so funny how life is so much about luck and being in the right place at the right time. And that doesn't in any way take away from how hard you worked.
No, you have to work, and you have to have talent, and you have to have energy, and you have to have enthusiasm, and all of those things. But it was kind of a moment, and also at that time, to have men that understood that it was not about male, female, it was about, can you do it? Do you feel comfortable? A lot of people had gone into television for whom it was a chore and a horrible nightmare, including Bruce. He didn't really like it that much, but he was very good at it. And he taught me that. He taught me that camera lens was, imagine your mother, imagine your father. That's who you're talking to. It's not a piece of equipment. It's people. And this is the connector that puts you together. And the camera very seldom lies. You can't be who you are not on camera because you can tell. It's a very sensitive medium. It's a very real connector with you and the audience. And when you get those things all straight in your head, then you just carry on doing what you're doing. Do your homework. Respect the people that you do business with and you talk with and interview with. And remember that that's who lives inside the camera, all of those people that you're doing this for and who are expecting you to do something that they're interested in.
And now forget about the camera.
Yeah, and then forget about it.
Take all that pressure on, and now forget about
it. And then never think about it.
You know,
which I don't, and it's, you know, it's great.
One of the things that I think Canadians admire about you, you talked just now about be who you are. And I think a lot of Canadians feel that when they watch you on TV or see you, that you are the same, the same person. One of the things that I think that helped to cement that for Canadians was when you became ill, because Canadians then were able to truly see that you were, in fact, a human being who was susceptible to the same types of things that they endured in their own lives. And I wanted to ask you what it was like when you got the diagnosis of cancer.
Well, look, there is no upside to that one. You know, what goes, you're denial. You know, you see symptoms, you're going to doctors, they're sending you for this test and that test. You know exactly what's coming. But even as you know, intelligent as you can be in your approach to other material, on that one somehow you just put down the door, you know, you close the door and you don't see it. So when you hear those words, I'm sorry, you know, this is cancer, it's just everything floods through your mind. You know, the things that you haven't done yet, the stupid ways you wasted time, the people that you should have said something to, tell them you love them, tell them whatever, that you didn't do. It just flashes through your mind in a nanosecond. And then almost immediately, because of the very public profile, you're going, okay, how am I going to deal with this? And actually, it was just such a relief, in a way, to be the kind of person I was. I'd asked everybody else about how they had dealt with this. I'd asked everybody else about personal questions and moments of change or disappointment or pain. And so I just had to do the same. I owed my audience that. I owed them that. And I wasn't going to get away with it anyway.
Right.
So why go down there? And what's the point? Somehow you would just be diminishing that situation instead of making it something that you need to face and challenge. So again, it was I got together with a group of friends and we spent a night talking about this and how we would do this and you know, put out a press release, or you know, so that the papers could do it first, so that people could read it and get ready before I actually talked about it. And so it was like thinking through a strategy. I think it allowed people then to buy in and follow along. And I talked endlessly about this, about colorectal cancer afterwards. And it's one of those cancers that can be prevented and can be treated if you get it early enough. So I just went on a campaign. I mean, for God's sake, go and get a colonoscopy. They'll give you a few drugs. It won't be that bad.
Right.
You know, just
get it done.
Just get it done. And I was relentless with my own friends. And I got this letter from what I assumed from the handwriting was an older lady who said, my husband and I never talked about those parts down there. Yeah. And then she said, I heard you on television, and I said to my husband, you have to get that test. And he went and got that test, and they found some polyps, and they took them off. And I just thought, okay, if there was ever a nanosecond of wonder whether or not I should be completely public about this, it just disappeared in that way. And the doctor, you know, he was a young guy and terrific guy, and I said, you know, unfortunately colorectal cancer isn't, you know, it doesn't have the nice pretty pink bows and all the stuff that goes with it. And he said, yeah, well, maybe that's why you know, were given this, and the way he put it was sort of opportunity. Because you have to go out and talk about it, and you're capable of doing it.
And that's, you've obviously made an impact on people in terms of being vocal about it and raising the awareness. But there's a saying that whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Yeah. On a personal level, do you think that's true? Did it make you stronger, or did it make you more scared of your own mortality?
No. It made me much more realistic about that. About, you know, you are only mortal and you will die. and you may be hit by a bus tomorrow, or the cancer may come back, or there could be 1,000 things. But what it really did, and which is why, and I hesitate to say this for anybody who is still in the moment of struggling, is that when you survive this, it is a gift unlike almost any other, because it makes you look at your life and say, okay, second chance here. I went in, I was due for surgery on the 12th of September 2001. So my mom and dad were visiting me. We got up on the morning of the 11th of September, as did everybody else, turned on their televisions and watched the situation in New York unfold. I knew within minutes that my surgery would be postponed because Sunnybrook Hospital was an international trauma center, and we all assumed that thousands of people would be flown up for treatment. As we knew pretty quickly, there were no survivors. And so the surgery was put back on, and I went in on Friday of that week. And you don't never know what's going to happen. They tell you the risks and all of that, and you come out the other side, and you have survived this disease, this cancer, this killer. And 3,000 people simply got up in the morning and went to work, or got on a plane, or went to have breakfast at the Twin Towers, or did whatever they did. And you just think, okay, you've got to be here for a reason, because in the scheme of things, if you're given a second chance, then the stuff you do better matter. And I went down to New York and hosted an event called Canada Loves New York, and I've always been very connected to that city anyway. And, to be then, within months, given the opportunity to go as Canada's Consul General to New York,
right,
it's got to make you believe that there's a plan.
Yep.
Some there, and it took me a nanosecond to just say yes. And the company was very successful, and we just signed a new contract to do another season of shows. But this one was like,
you had to do it.
I had to do it.
Yeah.
I didn't even let Prime Minister Chrétien finish the sentence. It was just like, yeah. And I joked subsequently to him, it's a lucky thing I didn't end up in New Guinea, because I don't think he actually got York out before I said yes. And it was just, I needed to be there. I needed to do that. The relationship between these two countries is so important. It was in a state of, chaos. There were rumors that the terrorists that had come across the Canadian border, the borders were being shut down, the walls were going up. It was just, and it was about communication and about connecting and about getting out there and talking to people and being in their face and being aggressive, but also understanding what hell they had just been through. And in my own personal situation, I'd just been through that. So, I just never had a conversation with anybody in New York, and the entire time I was there, that I didn't think, where were you on 9/11, what touched you, who did you lose? And then that was the starting point for any relationship I started to build. And if you give people that, they know it and they feel it, and it makes a connection on a whole other level. So it just was an amazing, serendipitous set of events that allowed me to do something I think that really mattered with my life.
We have to end it on that note. It's been such a pleasure to chat with you.
It's great to see you.
30 minutes flies right by in a good conversation.
You look wonderful. I hope the kids are great.
And thank you.
And love to your mom and dad.
I appreciate it. And thank you for taking the time. I know it's a busy world you live in.
Really enjoyed it, Catherine. Really enjoyed it.